Most people are not destroyed by failure. They are destroyed by emotion. One moment of anger ruins relationships. One moment of insecurity destroys confidence. One emotional reaction can erase years of discipline. And the worst part, most people never realize they are being controlled. They think they are thinking clearly, but they are reacting. Reacting to disrespect. Reacting to fear. Reacting to rejection. Reacting to pressure. This audiobook is about taking your power back. Because the person who controls their emotions controls the room, controls the conversation, controls their future. And by the end of this audiobook, you will stop being emotionally manipulated by people, situations, pressure, and pain. You will become calm, unreadable, disciplined, dangerously focused. Most people think they are in control of their emotions. They are not. They think they are making independent decisions. But most of their reactions are programmed, conditioned, predicted. A notification changes their mood. A comment ruins their confidence. A text message controls their peace. A headline controls their fear. A stranger's opinion controls their behavior. And they never stop long enough to realize what is happening. That is the danger. Because if they can trigger you, they can control you. That's the key. The modern world survives on emotional manipulation. Social media depends on it. News channels profit from it. Toxic people use it. Corporations study it. Algorithms are designed around it. Your anger is profitable. Your fear is profitable. Your insecurity is profitable. The more emotional you become, the easier you are to influence. Think about how many people wake up and immediately hand their emotions to the world. Before they even drink water, they check their phone. They scroll through bad news. They compare themselves to strangers online. They absorb negativity before their brain is fully awake. And then they wonder why they feel anxious all day. You have a choice. You can continue reacting automatically like everyone else. Or you can become aware of what controls your emotional state. Awareness changes everything. Because once you see the manipulation, you stop becoming its victim. Most people are emotionally programmable because they never trained their minds. They train their reactions instead. Someone insults them, they explode. Someone ignores them, they panic. Someone succeeds, they become jealous. Someone disagrees, they become defensive. Predictable. And predictable people are easy to control. That is why emotional people lose power in every environment. In relationships. In business. In leadership. In life. A person who cannot control their emotions eventually becomes controlled by someone who can. Look at arguments. Most arguments are not conversations. They are emotional competitions. One person says something emotional. The other reacts emotionally. Voices rise. Egos take over. Logic disappears. Nobody is thinking clearly anymore. And the person who stays calm usually controls the outcome. Why? Because silence sees what emotion misses. Remember that. Silence sees what emotion misses. When you become emotional, your perception narrows. You stop observing. You stop listening. You stop thinking strategically. Emotion creates tunnel vision. That is why angry people say things they regret. Fearful people make weak decisions. Insecure people sabotage opportunities. Emotion clouds judgment. And the world notices it immediately. In the workplace, emotional people are easy to expose. They overreact to criticism. They take feedback personally. They gossip when frustrated. They make impulsive decisions under pressure. Meanwhile, calm people become respected. Not because they are emotionless. Because they are disciplined. It's not about suppressing emotion. It's about controlling emotion. There is a difference. Weak people let emotions lead. Strong people let emotions inform them, but never control them. That's the key. You can feel anger without becoming destructive. You can feel fear without becoming paralyzed. You can feel pressure without collapsing mentally. Emotional mastery is not the absence of feeling. It is the presence of discipline. And discipline changes everything. Social media proves this every day. People are emotionally manipulated by comparison constantly. Someone sees another person with money. Now they feel insecure. Someone sees a perfect relationship online. Now they feel inadequate. Someone posts an opinion they disagree with. Now they feel rage. Their emotions are no longer self-controlled. They are externally controlled. If they can trigger you, they can control you. That phrase should stay in your mind forever. Because emotional reactions reveal your weaknesses to the world. The moment someone discovers what triggers you, they discover where you are vulnerable. Some people provoke you intentionally. Some people criticize you intentionally. Some people disrespect you intentionally. Not because they are powerful. Because they know emotional people are easy to manipulate. The strongest person in the room is usually the calmest. Not the loudest. Not the angriest. Not the most emotional. The calmest. Because calmness creates clarity. And clarity creates power. Think about elite athletes. Soldiers. Surgeons. Leaders. Under pressure, panic destroys performance. Training exists to create emotional control under stress. Because pressure exposes emotional weakness immediately. Anyone can stay calm when life is easy. The real test comes during chaos. When people attack you. When plans fail. When stress rises. When emotions intensify. Can you still think clearly? Can you still stay disciplined? Can you still control yourself? That is real power. You do not need to win every argument. You do not need to react to every insult. You do not need to prove yourself emotionally. You need control. You need awareness. You need discipline. Most people spend years trying to control other people. Very few learn to control themselves. And that is why so many lives collapse emotionally. One impulsive reaction destroys a relationship. One angry decision ruins an opportunity. One emotional moment creates years of regret. Because emotions move fast. But consequences move slower. And slower consequences are more dangerous. That's why emotional discipline must become a daily practice. You train your body consistently. You must train your mind the same way. Pause before reacting. Observe before speaking. Think before responding. Simple. But not easy. Especially in a world designed to provoke you constantly. That is why emotional control has become rare. And rare qualities create powerful people. The truth is this. Your emotions are either tools or weapons used against you. You have a choice. Every single day. You can continue giving strangers, situations, and circumstances control over your internal state. Or you can reclaim your mind. Because once you stop reacting emotionally to everything, you begin thinking clearly for the first time. And clear thinkers become dangerous. Calm people become difficult to manipulate. Disciplined people become difficult to break. Remember the lesson. If they can trigger you, they can control you. And silence sees what emotion misses. Master that principle, and your entire life begins to change. Because emotional control is not weakness. It is power. You are learning to stop reacting automatically. You are learning to observe before responding. You are learning to remain calm while others lose control. That is the beginning of emotional mastery. But controlling emotion requires more than awareness. It requires restraint. And in the next chapter, you will learn the skill that separates mentally strong people from emotionally exhausted people. Most people are emotionally exhausted for one reason. They react to everything. Every opinion. Every message. Every insult. Every inconvenience. Every piece of bad news. Every moment of discomfort. Their nervous system never rests. And then they wonder why they feel mentally drained all the time. Because every reaction costs energy. That's the truth. Every emotional response demands attention. And attention is one of the most valuable resources you have. Your attention shapes your thoughts. Your thoughts shape your actions. Your actions shape your life. That's why your attention is your life force. Remember that phrase. Your attention is your life force. Most people waste it carelessly. They wake up and immediately react. React to notifications. React to social media. React to drama. React to problems that have nothing to do with them. By the end of the day, their mind feels heavy. Not because life is impossible. Because they gave their mental energy to everything. You have a choice. You can continue reacting automatically like the average person. Or you can become selective. Selective with your energy. Selective with your words. Selective with your emotional investment. That's the key. Not every battle deserves your attention. Read that again. Not every battle deserves your attention. Some arguments are traps. Some people want reactions. Some situations are designed to drain you emotionally. And emotionally undisciplined people fall into these traps constantly. Someone criticizes them online. Now they spend hours defending themselves. Someone misunderstands them. Now they feel desperate to explain everything. Someone disrespects them. Now they lose emotional control trying to prove a point. Exhausting. And most of the time, none of it changes anything. Because emotional reactions rarely create clarity. They usually create more chaos. Look at gossip. Most gossip survives because emotional people cannot resist reacting. They hear something negative. Now they need to respond. Now they need to defend themselves. Now they need everyone to understand their side. But calm people understand something powerful. You do not need to attend every emotional invitation. That's discipline. And discipline protects peace. Weak people think silence means losing. Strong people understand silence is often control. Because when you stop reacting impulsively, you start seeing situations clearly. Silence creates perspective. Emotion destroys perspective. That is why emotionally mature people pause before responding. Not because they are afraid. Because they are aware. Aware that temporary emotions create permanent consequences. One emotional message can destroy trust. One angry sentence can ruin relationships. One impulsive decision can damage your future. And most people realize it too late. That's why emotional discipline matters. It slows you down before destruction happens. You do not always need the final word. You do not always need to defend your ego. You do not always need to explain yourself. You don't need their permission. That's one of the hardest lessons emotionally reactive people must learn. Not everyone will understand you. Not everyone will agree with you. Not everyone will like you. And that is completely fine. The problem is that many people are addicted to emotional validation. They need approval constantly. So they over-explain, overreact, overshare, overdefend. Because deep down, they are terrified of being misunderstood. But emotionally strong people accept something different. Being misunderstood is not fatal. Losing self-control is. That's the key. It's not about proving yourself. It's about protecting your peace. Every unnecessary reaction steals energy from your real goals. Think about how many people waste entire days emotionally distracted. One rude comment destroys their focus. One stressful conversation ruins their productivity. One inconvenience controls their entire mood. That is not power. That is dependency. Your emotional state cannot depend on external events forever. Otherwise the world controls you completely. You have a choice. You can build internal stability. Or you can remain emotionally available to every distraction around you. Strong minds choose stability. And stability requires restraint. Restraint is difficult because the ego always wants immediate reaction. The ego wants revenge. The ego wants attention. The ego wants emotional release. But discipline asks a different question. Will this reaction improve my life? Most of the time, the answer is no. That argument online? Meaningless. that need to prove someone wrong. Meaningless. That emotional impulse to text back immediately while angry. Dangerous. Pause. That pause changes everything. Because in that pause, logic returns. In that pause, clarity returns. In that pause, you reclaim control over yourself. Emotion says react now. Discipline says think first. And that difference separates peaceful people from chaotic people. Your tone matters too. Emotionally reactive people speak emotionally. Loud. Defensive. Aggressive. Impulsive. But emotionally disciplined people control tone even under pressure. Calm voice. Measured words. Controlled presence. Because they understand something powerful. The calmer you remain, the harder you are to manipulate. People expect reactions. They expect anger. They expect emotional weakness. And when they cannot control your emotional state, they lose power over you. That is why calmness feels intimidating to emotional people. Because calmness signals control. Not fake control. Real control. The kind developed through awareness and repetition. You train it daily. By not responding immediately. By not engaging in pointless conflict. By not feeding emotional chaos. Small moments build emotional strength. That's the key. Emotional freedom is built through repeated restraint. Not one big moment. Daily discipline. Most people think freedom means doing whatever they feel. Wrong. That creates addiction, chaos, and instability. Real freedom is controlling yourself despite what you feel. That is emotional mastery. When anger appears, you stay calm. When pressure rises, you stay focused. When drama appears, you stay detached. Not because you feel nothing. Because you choose discipline over impulse. And that choice changes your entire life. Your attention is your life force. Protect it carefully. Stop giving it to meaningless conflict. Stop giving it to people who drain your energy. Stop giving it to emotional distractions that add no value to your future. Not everything deserves access to your mind. And once you understand that, peace becomes easier to maintain. You stop reacting automatically. You stop defending yourself constantly. You stop allowing temporary emotions to control permanent decisions. You become harder to shake. Harder to provoke. Harder to manipulate. And that emotional discipline creates mental freedom. Because freedom is not about controlling the world. It is about controlling yourself inside the world. Remember that. Every reaction costs energy. Every pause builds power. And every moment of restraint strengthens your mind. You are learning that emotional control is not only about staying calm. It is also about refusing to waste your energy carelessly. But emotional reactions often come from something even deeper. The desperate need to be accepted. The need to be validated. And that is exactly what we will confront next. Most people are not living freely. They are performing. Performing for approval. Performing for acceptance. Performing for validation. And the saddest part? Most of them do not even realize it. They shape their personality around what gets accepted. They hide their real thoughts to avoid judgment. They change their goals to fit social expectations. Why? Because they are addicted to validation. And validation addiction is emotional slavery. Remember this phrase. The more validation you need, the less power you keep. That's the key. The moment your confidence depends on other people's approval, your emotional stability disappears. Now strangers control your self-worth. Now opinions control your identity. Now rejection controls your confidence. That is dangerous. Because people are inconsistent. One day they praise you. The next day they criticize you. If your emotional state depends on outside approval, you will never have peace. You have a choice. You can build your identity internally. Or you can spend your life chasing emotional permission from the world. Most people choose the second option. And it destroys them slowly. Look at how many people constantly seek reassurance. They ask everyone what they should do. They need approval before making decisions. They fear disappointing people more than disappointing themselves. That fear creates weak behavior. People-pleasing. Over-explaining. Fake personalities. Constant anxiety. Because when approval becomes your emotional fuel, authenticity becomes impossible. You stop asking what you want. You start asking what will be accepted. That is how people betray themselves. Not all at once. Little by little. A person wants to pursue a dream. But friends laugh at them. So they stop. Someone wants to express their true personality. But they fear judgment. So they hide. Someone wants to leave a toxic relationship. But they fear disapproval. So they stay trapped. This is how validation addiction destroys lives. Quietly. The more validation you need, the less power you keep. Never forget that. Powerful people understand something emotionally weak people do not. You do not need everyone to understand you. You do not need universal approval. You do not need their permission. That sentence alone can change your life. You do not need their permission. Not to grow. Not to improve. Not to change. Not to become stronger. But insecure people constantly ask the world for emotional authorization. Do you approve of me? Am I good enough? Do you like me now? That mindset creates dependency. And dependency creates fear. Fear of rejection. Fear of criticism. Fear of standing out. So people shrink themselves to stay accepted. They become smaller versions of who they truly are. That is the tragedy. Validation addiction makes people abandon authenticity for comfort. And comfort slowly destroys potential. Look at social media carefully. Most people are not expressing themselves. They are marketing themselves. Posting for attention. Posting for approval. Posting for validation. And when the attention disappears, anxiety appears immediately. Because external validation is temporary. It never lasts. That is why emotionally disciplined people build self-respect internally. Not externally. They do not depend on applause to feel valuable. They do not collapse emotionally because someone disagrees with them. They know who they are. That's the key. Self-awareness creates emotional stability. But emotionally dependent people constantly over-explain themselves. They explain every decision, every boundary, every change. Why? Because they desperately want people to approve. But powerful people move differently. They move in silence. Not because they are secretive. Because they are focused. They understand something important. Real growth does not require constant announcement. Emotionally weak people talk constantly about what they want to become. Emotionally disciplined people become it quietly. One seeks attention. The other seeks transformation. Big difference. The loudest person in the room is often the most insecure. Because insecurity needs recognition constantly. But confidence does not beg to be seen. Confidence moves calmly. Silently. Without desperation. That is emotional power. You do not need to prove your value every day. You prove it through consistency. Through discipline. Through action. It's not about attention. It's about alignment. Alignment between your actions and your values. And once that alignment becomes strong, validation loses power over you. Criticism no longer destroys you. Rejection no longer controls you. Opinions no longer define you. Because your identity becomes internal. Not external. That is freedom. Most people never experience it because they spend their entire lives trying to fit in. But fitting in often requires self-betrayal. Think about how many people silence themselves to avoid judgment. How many people stay in environments that drain them emotionally because they fear disapproval? How many people live fake lives just to appear acceptable? Exhausting. And eventually, emotional exhaustion becomes emotional emptiness. Because pretending disconnects you from yourself. You cannot respect yourself fully while constantly abandoning your truth. That's why validation addiction creates anxiety. Deep down, people know they are not being authentic. And authenticity matters. Not because it sounds inspirational. Because authenticity creates peace. When you stop performing, your mind relaxes. When you stop chasing approval, your confidence grows. When you stop needing validation, emotional freedom begins. You have a choice. You can spend your life trying to satisfy everyone. Or you can build a life that genuinely satisfies you. One path creates anxiety. The other creates strength. And strength requires accepting something difficult. Some people will not understand your growth. Some people will dislike your boundaries. Some people will become uncomfortable when you stop seeking approval. Let them. That is part of emotional maturity. Not everyone deserves access to your energy. Not everyone deserves explanations. Not everyone deserves emotional control over your decisions. That's the key. You must stop negotiating your identity with the world. Because the more approval you chase, the more disconnected you become from your real self. And once you disconnect from yourself, emotional instability becomes unavoidable. Powerful people move in silence. They work quietly. heal quietly, grow quietly. They do not announce every goal. They do not seek applause for discipline. They simply focus. Because they understand something emotionally reactive people miss. Results speak louder than emotional performance. Always. The more validation you need, the less power you keep. But the moment you stop chasing approval, something incredible happens. Your confidence becomes stable. Your emotions become calmer. Your decisions become clearer. And your life becomes your own again. You stop living for reactions. You start living with purpose. That is emotional independence. And emotional independence changes everything. Because once you stop needing validation, you stop fearing rejection. And once you stop fearing rejection, you become dangerous. You become free to think clearly. Free to act boldly. Free to grow honestly. But emotional freedom requires another difficult skill. Detachment. The ability to care without losing control. The ability to love without becoming emotionally dependent. And that is exactly what we will master next. Most people misunderstand emotional detachment. They think detachment means becoming cold, emotionless, disconnected. Wrong. Detachment is not the absence of care. It is the absence of emotional dependency. That's the difference. Emotionally dependent people lose themselves inside situations, relationships, and emotions. Emotionally detached people remain grounded, calm, clear, controlled. That's the key. Detachment allows you to care without losing yourself. And most people desperately need to learn that skill. Because emotional attachment creates suffering. Not love. Not loyalty. Attachment. Remember this phrase. Attachment creates fear. Fear destroys clarity. Read it again. Attachment creates fear. Fear destroys clarity. The more emotionally attached you become to something, the more afraid you become of losing it. And fear changes behavior immediately. People become desperate, controlling, jealous, anxious. Not because they are evil. Because they are emotionally dependent. They believe their peace depends on another person, situation, or outcome. That mindset destroys emotional stability. Look at toxic relationships. Many people stay in unhealthy situations because they are attached emotionally. Even when they are disrespected, ignored, manipulated, drained, they stay. Why? Because attachment creates fear. Fear of abandonment. Fear of loneliness. Fear of starting over. And fear destroys clarity. Deep down, they know the relationship is unhealthy. But emotional attachment blinds them. That is why emotionally dependent people tolerate things emotionally strong people would walk away from immediately. Because attachment weakens boundaries. You have a choice. You can build relationships from strength. Or from emotional dependency. One creates peace. The other creates suffering. Emotionally detached people still love deeply. But they never lose control of themselves in the process. That is emotional intelligence. Weak people become consumed by emotion. Strong people remain aware inside emotion. Big difference. Detachment allows you to observe clearly. Without panic. Without desperation. Without emotional chaos. That clarity changes everything. Because distance creates perspective. When you are emotionally overwhelmed, you stop seeing reality objectively. You only see emotion. That is dangerous. Think about jealousy. Jealousy is often emotional attachment mixed with insecurity. Someone becomes obsessed with controlling another person. Checking phones. Overthinking messages. Creating imaginary scenarios. Emotion takes over completely. And once emotion takes over, logic disappears. That's why emotionally attached people suffer so intensely. Their emotional state becomes dependent on external behavior. If someone responds quickly, they feel calm. If someone pulls away, they panic. That is not peace. That is emotional captivity. And many people spend years trapped there. They call it love. But often, it is fear disguised as love. Real emotional strength comes from stability within yourself. Not dependence on another person's behavior. That's the key. Detachment protects your inner peace. Not because you stop caring. Because you stop losing yourself emotionally. Most people confuse attachment with connection. But healthy connection does not destroy emotional balance. Healthy connection allows space, trust, individual identity. Emotionally dependent people cannot tolerate space. Because silence triggers fear immediately. Distance triggers insecurity immediately. And insecurity creates controlling behavior. That is why emotional detachment is necessary. Not to disconnect from people. To protect clarity. Attachment creates fear. Fear destroys clarity. Remember that constantly. Because fear changes decision-making. People ignore red flags because of attachment. People tolerate disrespect because of attachment. People betray themselves because of attachment. And the longer it continues, the more emotionally exhausted they become. Detachment interrupts that cycle. It allows you to step back and ask important questions. Is this healthy for me? Is this bringing peace or chaos? Am I acting from clarity or fear? Most people never pause long enough to ask those questions. They react emotionally instead. That reaction creates suffering. Detachment creates observation. And observation creates wisdom. That is why emotionally strong people know when to walk away. Not because they enjoy losing people. Because they respect themselves enough not to lose themselves. Self-respect matters. More than attachment. More than approval. More than emotional comfort. You don't need their permission to protect your peace. Never forget that. Some people will call detachment selfish. Ignore them. Emotionally weak people often feel uncomfortable around emotionally disciplined people. Why? Because emotionally disciplined people cannot be manipulated easily. Guilt stops working. Pressure stops working. Emotional games stop working. Because detached people remain calm enough to see clearly. That calmness is power. Think about high-pressure situations. Breakups. Arguments. Stress. Conflict. Emotionally attached people collapse internally. They beg, chase, overreact. But emotionally detached people pause. They breathe. They observe. They maintain dignity. Not because they feel no pain. Because they refuse to let pain control behavior. It's not about avoiding emotion. It's about controlling emotion. That's the key. Emotional detachment also protects your goals. Many people abandon their future because they become emotionally consumed by distractions. One toxic relationship destroys focus. One emotional obsession destroys productivity. One fear of rejection destroys confidence. Why? Because attachment steals attention. And your attention is your life force. You must protect it. Emotionally disciplined people understand when to step back emotionally. Not forever. Just long enough to regain clarity. Distance creates perspective. A calm mind sees reality differently than an emotional mind. That is why time often changes emotional understanding. What felt catastrophic yesterday becomes manageable today. Why? Because emotional intensity faded. And clarity returned. This is why emotionally mature people avoid impulsive decisions during emotional moments. They wait. They reflect. They detach emotionally before acting permanently. That habit alone can save years of regret. You have a choice. You can allow emotions to consume your judgment. Or you can develop the discipline to step back and observe before reacting. One path creates chaos. The other creates peace. Detachment does not mean isolation. It does not mean becoming emotionally unavailable. It means remaining emotionally balanced. Balanced enough to love without obsession. Balanced enough to care without fear. Balanced enough to walk away from what destroys your peace. That is strength. And strength creates freedom. The moment you stop depending emotionally on external people and situations, your mind becomes calmer. Stronger. Clearer. You stop panicking over temporary emotions. You stop collapsing under uncertainty. You stop losing yourself trying to hold on to things that are not meant for you. And that emotional freedom changes your entire life. Because emotional mastery requires clarity. And clarity requires distance from emotional chaos. Remember the lesson. Attachment creates fear. Fear destroys clarity. Distance creates perspective. And perspective creates power. You are learning how to remain calm inside emotional situations instead of becoming consumed by them. But there is one emotion that destroys more lives than almost any other. Anger. Uncontrolled anger ruins relationships, opportunities, and futures every single day. And in the next chapter, we will confront it directly. Anger feels powerful. That is why so many people become addicted to it. In the moment, anger creates intensity. Control. Adrenaline. Emotion. It makes weak people feel strong temporarily. But anger is one of the most destructive emotions when left undisciplined. Because anger destroys judgment. That's the truth. A single moment of uncontrolled anger can destroy years of work. One emotional outburst ruins a relationship. One impulsive decision ruins a career. One violent reaction ruins a future. And most people realize it too late. After the damage is already done. That's why emotional mastery matters. Because consequences do not care how emotional you felt in the moment. The world is full of people living with regret caused by temporary anger. Texts they should not have sent. Words they should not have said. Actions they should not have taken. All because emotion became stronger than discipline. You have a choice. You can allow anger to control your behavior. Or you can learn to control anger before it controls you. That's the key. Anger itself is not the enemy. Uncontrolled anger is. There is a difference. Anger is natural. Everyone feels it. But emotionally weak people express anger impulsively. Emotionally disciplined people redirect it intelligently. Big difference. Most anger comes from wounded ego. Not wisdom. Remember this phrase. Your ego wants revenge. Your discipline wants peace. Read it again. Your ego wants revenge. Your discipline wants peace. That sentence explains most emotional conflict in the world. Someone disrespects you. Now the ego wants retaliation. Someone embarrasses you. Now the ego wants dominance. Someone rejects you. Now the ego wants revenge. But revenge rarely creates peace. It usually creates more chaos. That's why emotionally reactive people stay trapped in cycles of anger for years. They replay disrespect constantly in their minds. They relive arguments repeatedly. They obsess over proving something. Because the ego hates feeling small. And anger temporarily protects the ego from insecurity. That's the hidden truth most people never realize. A large amount of anger comes from pain, insecurity, embarrassment, rejection, fear. People explode emotionally because something inside them feels threatened. Their identity, their pride, their control. That is why emotionally mature people analyze anger instead of blindly obeying it. They ask, what exactly triggered me? Why did this affect me so deeply? Is this about the situation, or my ego? That awareness changes everything. Because once you understand your triggers, you stop becoming controlled by them. Most people never do this work. They simply react. That reaction creates destruction. Look at workplace anger. Someone receives criticism. Instead of learning, they become defensive. Now relationships suffer. Opportunities disappear. Respect decreases. Why? Because emotion replaced intelligence. Or think about relationships. One argument escalates emotionally. Voices rise. Painful words are exchanged. And suddenly years of trust become damaged in one emotional moment. All because neither person paused long enough to control themselves. That's why discipline matters more than intensity. Always. It's not about emotion. It's about control. Remember that. Emotion without control creates chaos. And chaos destroys peace. Your ego wants revenge. Your discipline wants peace. The emotionally strongest people are not the people who never feel anger. They are the people who refuse to let anger make decisions for them. That is real strength. Because restraint requires power. Anyone can explode emotionally. That requires no discipline. But staying calm while angry, that requires mastery. And mastery is rare. Especially in a world where emotional reactions are encouraged constantly. People celebrate outrage, reward impulsiveness, normalize aggression. But emotionally intelligent people move differently. They understand something important. The calmer you remain, the clearer you think. And clear thinking protects your future. That does not mean suppressing anger completely. Suppressed anger becomes poison. It leaks into behavior slowly. Bitterness, resentment, passive aggression. That is unhealthy too. The goal is not suppression. The goal is transformation. Controlled anger becomes focused energy. That's the key. The same energy used for rage can be redirected into growth, training, discipline, self-improvement, focus. Many successful people transformed pain and anger into fuel. Instead of destroying themselves emotionally, they built themselves physically, mentally, and financially. That is power. Not emotional explosion. Transformation. Someone doubts you. Work harder quietly. Someone rejects you. Improve yourself silently. Someone disrespects you. Become stronger without announcing it. That is emotional discipline. Weak people seek revenge publicly. Strong people improve privately. Big difference. You do not need to prove your anger. You need to control it. Because uncontrolled anger usually harms the person carrying it most. It destroys sleep. Destroys focus. Destroys peace. Angry people often spend more time suffering internally than the people they are angry at. Think about that carefully. Many people poison their own minds replaying emotional pain repeatedly. That is self-destruction. And self-destruction disguised as strength is still weakness. You have a choice. You can carry anger endlessly. Or you can use it strategically. One path creates exhaustion. The other creates growth. That's why emotionally disciplined people create systems for controlling anger. They pause before responding. They leave situations before escalation. They breathe before speaking. They train their bodies to release stress physically. Simple habits. Powerful results. Most importantly, they stop personalizing everything. Not every insult matters. Not every disrespect deserves emotional energy. Not every opinion deserves reaction. Mature people understand this deeply. Immature people react to everything emotionally. That is why emotional discipline creates freedom. The less reactive you become, the more peaceful your life becomes. Not because problems disappear. Because your mind becomes stronger than the problems. Your ego wants revenge. Your discipline wants peace. Never forget that phrase. The ego is loud. Discipline is quiet. The ego seeks emotional satisfaction immediately. Discipline seeks long-term stability. And long-term stability always wins. Real power is not screaming louder. Not intimidating people. Not emotional dominance. Real power is remaining composed when chaos tries to consume you. That is emotional mastery. And emotional mastery changes everything. Because once you control anger, you stop becoming dangerous to yourself. You stop sabotaging relationships. Stop making impulsive decisions. Stop destroying opportunities emotionally. Instead, you become focused, calm, intentional. And intentional people build powerful lives. Remember the lesson. Anger destroys judgment. Your ego wants revenge. Your discipline wants peace. Controlled anger becomes focused energy. Master that, and you stop wasting your emotional power on destruction. Instead, you begin using it for transformation. But anger is not the only emotion that traps people mentally. Fear controls even more lives than anger ever will. Fear keeps people small, silent, stuck. And in the next chapter, we will confront it directly. Most prisons do not have bars. They exist inside the mind. Fear is one of them. Silent, invisible, constant. It controls millions of people every single day. Not through force. Through hesitation. Fear keeps people quiet when they should speak. Fear keeps people stuck when they should move. Fear keeps people small when they were meant to grow. And the most dangerous part? Many people do not even realize fear is controlling their lives. They call it being realistic. They call it waiting for the right moment. They call it being careful. But often, it is fear wearing a smarter disguise. Fear controls most human behavior. That's the truth. People avoid opportunities because of fear. Avoid rejection because of fear. Avoid change because of fear. And slowly, fear becomes identity. A person wants to start a business. Fear says, "What if you fail?" A person wants to speak confidently. Fear says, "What if they judge you?" A person wants to leave a toxic environment. Fear says, "What if things get worse?" So they stay stuck. Not because they lack ability. Because fear became stronger than purpose. Remember this phrase. Fear speaks loudly when purpose is weak. That's the key. When your vision is unclear, fear dominates your mind easily. But when purpose becomes stronger, fear loses power. Not completely, but enough for movement to begin. Because courageous people still feel fear. They simply refuse to obey it. That is an important lesson. Courage is not fearlessness. Courage is emotional control under pressure. Weak people think bravery means feeling no fear. Wrong. Everyone feels fear. Athletes feel fear before competition. Leaders feel fear before difficult decisions. Performers feel fear before stepping on stage. The difference is discipline. Disciplined people move forward anyway. That's courage. Fear says stop. Purpose says continue. And the strongest voice wins. You have a choice. You can obey fear for the rest of your life. Or you can train yourself to move despite it. One path creates regret. The other creates growth. Most people never realize how much fear steals from them. Not only opportunities, identity, potential, confidence. Fear convinces people to betray themselves daily. They stay silent to avoid criticism. They hide their goals to avoid judgment. They avoid action to avoid failure. And slowly, avoidance becomes lifestyle. That is dangerous. Because anxiety grows when action disappears. Remember that carefully. Anxiety grows when action disappears. Overthinking feeds fear. Movement weakens it. Most anxious people are trapped inside mental loops. Thinking. Analyzing. Imagining worst-case scenarios constantly. But thinking alone rarely creates confidence. Action does. Confidence is built through movement. Not perfection. Movement. A person afraid of public speaking becomes confident by speaking more. A person afraid of rejection becomes stronger by facing rejection. A person afraid of failure grows by taking risks repeatedly. Action trains the nervous system. Avoidance weakens it. That's why fear grows when ignored. Every avoided conversation increases anxiety. Every delayed decision increases stress. Every postponed goal increases self-doubt. Because deep down, the mind notices avoidance. And avoidance sends a dangerous message to yourself. I cannot handle this. That belief destroys confidence slowly. But action sends a different message. I survived. That message builds resilience. And resilience creates emotional strength. That's the key. Fear shrinks when confronted consistently. Not instantly. Consistently. Most people wait to feel ready before acting. That is a mistake. You become ready through action. Not before it. Fear is emotional resistance to uncertainty. And life will always contain uncertainty. Always. There is no perfect moment. No guaranteed outcome. No completely safe path. Waiting for certainty is another form of fear. Emotionally strong people understand this. So they move anyway. Not recklessly, but courageously. Because they know something emotionally weak people forget. Pain from failure fades. Pain from regret lasts much longer. Think about how many people regret opportunities they never took. Conversations they never had. Dreams they never pursued. Lives they never fully lived. All because fear controlled the decision. That is the invisible prison. And most prisoners never escape because fear becomes comfortable. Predictable misery feels safer than uncertain growth. But growth always requires discomfort. Always. It's not about comfort. It's about courage. That's the key. Fear also destroys emotional clarity. When people are afraid, they often imagine disasters that never happen. The mind exaggerates danger constantly. That is what anxiety does. It creates emotional movies inside your head. Worst-case scenarios. Embarrassment. Failure. Rejection. And emotionally reactive people believe every thought immediately. Emotionally disciplined people observe thoughts without obeying them. Big difference. Just because fear speaks does not mean you must listen. That is emotional mastery. You pause. You breathe. You assess reality calmly. Then you move intentionally. Fear says, you might fail. Discipline says, move anyway. Fear says, people may judge you. Discipline says, do it anyway. Fear says, you are not ready. Discipline says, learn through action. That internal conversation shapes your future. Every single day. Your life changes the moment action becomes stronger than fear. Because action creates momentum. And momentum creates confidence. Most confident people were once terrified beginners. Remember that. Confidence is earned emotionally through repeated exposure to discomfort. Not magically received. You train courage like a muscle. One difficult conversation at a time. One uncomfortable decision at a time. One bold action at a time. Small acts of courage eventually change identity. And identity changes destiny. Fear speaks loudly when purpose is weak. So strengthen your purpose. Know what matters to you. Know who you want to become. Know what kind of life you refuse to settle for. Purpose gives pain meaning. Purpose gives fear competition. Without purpose, fear dominates easily. But with purpose, fear becomes manageable. Not because it disappears. Because it no longer controls behavior. That is freedom. Not the absence of fear. Freedom from obedience to fear. You have a choice. You can continue building a life around avoidance. Or you can build a life around courage. One path creates emotional weakness. The other creates emotional mastery. And emotional mastery always requires pressure. Pressure reveals who controls their emotions and who becomes controlled by them. That is why difficult moments matter. They expose emotional conditioning immediately. When fear rises, do you panic? Or do you remain calm enough to move forward anyway? That answer defines your future. Remember the lesson. Fear is the invisible prison. Anxiety grows when action disappears. And courage is emotional control under pressure. Master that, and fear loses the power to define your life. But emotional strength also requires protecting your peace from external people. Because some people will constantly try to disturb your emotional state. Manipulate it. Control it. Drain it. And in the next chapter, we will confront exactly how to stop letting people control your mind. Some people do not want peace. They want reactions. Attention. Control. Emotional access to your mind. And if you are not careful, they will drain your energy slowly while pretending to simply be themselves. That is why emotional boundaries are necessary. Not optional. Necessary. Because some people feed on emotional reactions. They provoke intentionally, manipulate intentionally, create drama intentionally. Why? Because emotionally reactive people are easier to control. Remember that. If someone can control your emotions, they can influence your decisions. That's the key. Many manipulators do not control people physically. They control them emotionally. Through guilt, pressure, fear, confusion, and emotionally undisciplined people fall into these traps constantly. A toxic coworker criticizes them. Now their entire day is ruined. A narcissist withdraws attention. Now anxiety takes over. A manipulative partner creates emotional chaos. Now self-doubt appears immediately. This happens every day. And most people never realize they are slowly giving away control of their mental state. That is dangerous. Protect your mind like your life depends on it, because it does. Read that again. Protect your mind like your life depends on it, because it does. Because your mind controls everything. Your energy. Your focus. Your decisions. Your future. And the wrong people can destroy all of it if you allow unlimited emotional access. You have a choice. You can continue allowing toxic people to disturb your peace. Or you can finally establish emotional boundaries. One path creates exhaustion. The other creates freedom. Most people avoid boundaries because they fear conflict. They fear disappointing others. They fear appearing rude. They fear rejection. So they tolerate emotional disrespect constantly. That tolerance slowly destroys self-respect. Every time you ignore your own emotional needs to avoid discomfort, you teach yourself something dangerous. My peace matters less than other people's approval. That mindset creates emotional weakness. Because emotionally strong people understand something important. Protecting your peace is not selfish. It is necessary. That's the key. You cannot build a strong life with a constantly disturbed mind. Impossible. A distracted mind creates poor decisions. An emotionally drained mind loses focus. A manipulated mind loses clarity. That is why boundaries matter. Boundaries protect clarity. Some people will test those boundaries immediately. The moment you say no, they become uncomfortable. Why? Because emotionally dependent people often dislike limits. They benefited from your lack of boundaries before. Now they cannot control you as easily. That is why guilt appears. Pressure appears. Manipulation appears. But emotionally disciplined people remain calm. They understand this truth. No is a complete sentence. You do not need endless explanations. You do not need emotional justification for protecting your peace. You don't need their permission. Never forget that. You are allowed to leave environments that destroy your mental health. You are allowed to distance yourself from chaos. You are allowed to stop answering every emotional demand placed on you. That is not cruelty. That is emotional maturity. Most people remain trapped in toxic environments because they confuse tolerance with kindness. Wrong. Constant emotional self-sacrifice eventually becomes self-destruction. Think about toxic workplaces, negative coworkers, constant gossip, emotional tension, manipulation. Many people absorb that energy daily without protecting themselves mentally. Then they wonder why they feel exhausted every night. Because environments affect emotional states. Always. That is why emotionally intelligent people become selective about who they allow close to them. Not everyone deserves access to your energy. Not everyone deserves unlimited emotional presence in your life. That is wisdom. Weak people allow everyone into their mental space. Strong people protect it carefully. Protect your mind like your life depends on it, because it does. Social media creates this problem too. People allow strangers online to control their mood completely. One comment ruins confidence. One opinion creates anger. One comparison creates insecurity. Why? Because emotional boundaries disappeared. Everything gained emotional access. That is unsustainable. Your nervous system was not designed to absorb constant emotional stimulation from the entire world. You must learn to disconnect intentionally. Not everything deserves your attention. Not every opinion deserves emotional energy. Not every person deserves a response. That's discipline. Emotionally reactive people feel obligated to respond constantly. Emotionally disciplined people understand silence is often protection. Silence protects peace. Especially around manipulators. Manipulative people often want emotional engagement. Arguments. Defensiveness. Emotional chaos. But calm people refuse to feed that cycle. They observe instead. They detach emotionally instead. Because they understand a painful truth. You cannot heal in environments constantly damaging your nervous system. Sometimes growth requires distance. Distance from negativity. Distance from emotional chaos. Distance from people who only contact you when they need emotional control. And yes, sometimes that includes people you care about deeply. That is difficult. But emotional maturity is often difficult. You have a choice. You can continue sacrificing your peace to keep everyone comfortable. Or you can protect your emotional health unapologetically. One path creates burnout. The other creates stability. Your peace must become non-negotiable. Not temporary. Not situational. Non-negotiable. That means learning to recognize emotional red flags quickly. People who constantly drain you emotionally. People who create chaos everywhere they go. People who disrespect boundaries repeatedly. Pay attention carefully. Emotionally healthy people do not constantly leave you emotionally exhausted. That exhaustion is information. Listen to it. Many people ignore emotional warning signs because they fear loneliness. But loneliness is temporary. Constant emotional chaos can become lifelong damage. That's the key. Protecting your peace sometimes requires painful decisions. Leaving environments. Ending relationships. Reducing access. Not from hatred. From self-respect. And self-respect changes everything. The moment you start valuing your mental peace properly, your standards change. You stop tolerating constant disrespect. You stop entertaining emotional manipulation. You stop explaining boundaries repeatedly. You become calmer, stronger, harder to emotionally control. That is emotional power. Because power is not controlling other people. Power is refusing to let other people control you. Remember the lesson. Some people feed on emotional reactions. Emotional boundaries protect your peace. And your peace must become non-negotiable. Protect your mind like your life depends on it, because it does. Because emotional mastery is not only about handling pressure internally. It is also about maintaining calmness externally when life becomes difficult. And pressure reveals emotional conditioning faster than anything else. That is exactly what we will confront next. Anyone can appear calm when life is easy. When everything is comfortable, predictable, safe. That requires no emotional discipline. The real test comes under pressure. When stress rises. When emotions intensify. When things stop going according to plan. That is where emotional conditioning is exposed. Because pressure does not create character. It reveals it. Remember that phrase. Pressure does not create character. It reveals it. Pressure reveals your habits. Your mindset. Your emotional discipline. If panic appears immediately under stress, that panic was already living inside you. Pressure simply exposed it. That's the key. Most people misunderstand calmness. They think calm people were born that way. Wrong. Calmness is trained, not inherited. Emotionally strong people became strong through repetition, discomfort, and self-awareness. They trained themselves to remain steady during difficult moments. And you can do the same. You have a choice. You can continue reacting emotionally every time pressure appears. Or you can train your nervous system to remain controlled. One path creates chaos. The other creates power. Think about stressful situations. Financial pressure. Conflict. Public criticism. Unexpected problems. Emergencies. Pressure hits suddenly. And emotionally reactive people collapse internally. They panic. Overthink. Speak impulsively. Lose clarity. Why? Because they never trained emotional control intentionally. They trained emotional reaction instead. Big difference. Pressure does not care about your intentions. It exposes your conditioning automatically. That is why emotionally disciplined people practice calmness before chaos arrives. Athletes train before competition. Soldiers train before battle. Pilots train before emergencies. Because under pressure, people rarely rise to expectations. They fall to their level of preparation. The same applies emotionally. If your mind is undisciplined daily, it will become chaotic under stress instantly. But if your mind is trained consistently, calmness becomes accessible even during difficulty. That's emotional mastery. Not perfection. Preparation. Calmness is a skill. And like every skill, it improves through repetition. Every time you pause instead of reacting emotionally, you strengthen control. Every time you breathe instead of panicking, you strengthen stability. Every time you remain calm during stress, you recondition your nervous system. Small moments matter. That's the key. Emotional discipline is built quietly. Daily. Most people only notice emotional weakness during major problems. But emotional conditioning happens in ordinary moments too. Traffic. Delays. Criticism. Discomfort. How you handle small stress reveals how you will handle major stress. An impatient mind becomes more impatient under pressure. An anxious mind becomes more anxious under pressure. A disciplined mind becomes calmer under pressure. That is why awareness matters. You must observe yourself honestly. What triggers you? What makes you panic? What causes emotional impulsiveness? Awareness creates control. Without awareness, emotion controls automatically. Stillness creates mental clarity. Remember that carefully. Stillness creates mental clarity. Most people make poor decisions under pressure because they speed up emotionally. They talk too fast. Think too fast. React too fast. Emotion takes over completely. But emotionally disciplined people slow themselves down intentionally. They breathe deeply. They pause before speaking. They observe before reacting. Simple actions. Powerful results. Breathing matters more than most people realize. When stress rises, breathing becomes shallow automatically. That shallow breathing signals danger to the nervous system. Now anxiety increases. Heart rate increases. Clarity decreases. But controlled breathing interrupts that cycle. Slow breathing tells the body, we are safe. And once the body calms down, the mind follows. That's the key. Many emotional reactions are physiological before they become psychological. Control the body first. Then the mind becomes easier to manage. That is why calm people often appear slower under pressure. Not weaker. More controlled. They understand something emotionally reactive people miss. Speed without clarity creates mistakes. Stillness creates clarity. Silence helps too. Emotionally reactive people speak immediately during pressure. They explain, defend, overreact. But emotionally disciplined people pause first. Silence gives the brain time to recover from emotional intensity. That pause can save relationships, save careers, save futures. One moment of emotional pause can prevent years of regret. Never underestimate the power of restraint. Pressure does not create character. It reveals it. Public criticism reveals emotional stability. Failure reveals resilience. Conflict reveals discipline. That is why pressure becomes valuable. It shows you where emotional weakness still exists. And weakness identified honestly can become strength through training. But only if you are willing to confront it. Most people avoid discomfort constantly. That is why they remain emotionally fragile. Growth requires discomfort. Always. It's not about comfort. It's about conditioning. That's the key. You condition your mind through repetition. If you constantly avoid difficult situations, your nervous system becomes weaker. But when you face discomfort intentionally, emotional resilience grows. Cold showers, hard conversations, difficult workouts, public speaking, pressure-filled environments. Discomfort trains emotional control. Not because suffering is magical. Because exposure creates adaptation. Your nervous system learns. I can handle pressure without collapsing. That belief changes everything. Confidence grows naturally from repeated emotional survival. Not from motivational words. From evidence. Evidence built through experience. That is why emotionally disciplined people stop running from difficulty. Difficulty becomes training. Pressure becomes practice. And over time, calmness becomes identity. Imagine how different your life becomes once pressure no longer controls you emotionally. Arguments no longer shake you. Criticism no longer destroys you. Unexpected problems no longer create panic. You remain steady. Focused. Clear. That is real strength. Not loudness. Not aggression. Calmness. Because calm people think clearly while emotional people react blindly. And clear thinking always creates better outcomes. You have a choice. You can allow pressure to expose emotional weakness repeatedly. Or you can train yourself to remain composed under stress. One path creates emotional exhaustion. The other creates emotional freedom. Stillness creates mental clarity. Remember that always. Pause before reacting. Breathe before speaking. Observe before deciding. These simple disciplines separate emotionally strong people from emotionally controlled people. And emotional control changes everything. Because once you remain calm under pressure, people lose the ability to manipulate your emotional state easily. You become difficult to provoke. Difficult to shake. Difficult to break. That is power. Remember the lesson. Calmness is trained, not inherited. Pressure does not create character. It reveals it. And stillness creates mental clarity. Master that, and your mind becomes stronger than chaos itself. But there is one final discipline that emotionally powerful people understand deeply. Silence. Not weakness. Not fear. Strategic silence. And in the next chapter, you will learn why silence is one of the greatest emotional advantages you will ever develop. Most people talk too much. Not because they are confident. Because they are emotional. Emotion always wants expression. Explanation. Reaction. Release. That is why emotional people overshare constantly. They explain every decision. Reveal every emotion. Broadcast every problem. Argue with strangers online. Speak impulsively when angry. And without realizing it, they give away power. Because emotion talks too much. That's the truth. Emotion wants immediate relief. But discipline values control. That's the key. Silence is not weakness. Silence is emotional restraint. And emotionally disciplined people understand the power of restraint deeply. They do not feel the need to explain themselves constantly. They do not chase understanding from everyone. They do not emotionally expose themselves to every person around them. Why? Because the less people know about your emotions, the less power they have over you. Remember that phrase carefully. The less people know about your emotions, the less power they have over you. Emotionally reactive people reveal themselves immediately. You know when they are angry. You know when they are insecure. You know when they are jealous. Everything is visible. That makes manipulation easier. Because once someone understands your emotional triggers, they understand how to control your reactions. But calm people are different. Measured. Unreadable. Not fake. Controlled. That is emotional intelligence. Silence increases perception. When you speak constantly, you stop observing. But when you observe more, you begin seeing things emotional people miss. Tone. Intentions. Patterns. Energy shifts. Emotionally disciplined people listen carefully because observation creates awareness. And awareness creates power. Most people are too busy reacting emotionally to notice reality clearly. They interrupt constantly. Defend constantly. Explain constantly. Meanwhile, calm observers gather information quietly. That information protects them. You have a choice. You can continue reacting emotionally and exposing your mind constantly. Or you can develop the discipline of silence. One path creates vulnerability. The other creates strength. Think about arguments. Emotionally reactive people talk endlessly when upset. They say things they regret. Reveal weaknesses impulsively. Create unnecessary damage emotionally. Why? Because anger wants expression immediately. But disciplined people pause. They understand something important. Not every thought deserves a voice. That's maturity. Silence creates space between emotion and action. And that space protects your future. One unnecessary sentence can damage trust permanently. One emotional outburst can destroy years of respect. That is why silence matters. Not because silence solves everything. Because silence prevents unnecessary destruction. Emotion talks too much. Remember that. Especially online. Social media rewards emotional impulsiveness constantly. People post every emotion immediately. Every frustration. Every insecurity. Every opinion. And then they wonder why they feel mentally exposed and emotionally exhausted. Because constant emotional expression drains energy. Not everyone deserves access to your inner world. That's the key. Privacy protects peace. Emotionally strong people understand this deeply. They heal quietly. Work quietly. Build quietly. Not because they are hiding. Because they are focused. Weak people announce everything. Strong people move with intention. Big difference. Silence also protects you from manipulation. Manipulative people rely on emotional information. They study reactions carefully. What triggers you? What hurts you? What makes you insecure? And emotionally reactive people reveal all of it freely. But unreadable people are difficult to manipulate. That is power. Not arrogance. Not emotional coldness. Control. The less people know about your emotions, the less power they have over you. Never forget that. This does not mean becoming emotionally disconnected. It means becoming emotionally disciplined. You can still be honest. Still authentic. Still emotionally intelligent. Without emotionally exposing yourself carelessly. That balance matters. Many people confuse oversharing with authenticity. Wrong. Authenticity means being real. Oversharing means lacking emotional boundaries. Huge difference. Emotionally mature people know when to speak and when to remain silent. That awareness changes relationships completely. Because silence often reveals more than words. People reveal themselves when you stop interrupting them. You notice inconsistencies, manipulation, hidden intentions. Observation sharpens when emotional noise decreases. That is why calm people often appear wiser. Not because they know everything. Because they observe more than they react. Most emotional mistakes happen too quickly. Too many words. Too much emotion. Too little awareness. Silence interrupts impulsiveness. That pause matters. Especially during conflict. Emotionally reactive people want immediate emotional release. They need to win arguments emotionally. But emotionally disciplined people prioritize clarity over ego. Sometimes silence protects peace more than proving a point ever could. That takes strength. Weak people need constant validation through speech. Strong people remain grounded even without external recognition. You don't need their permission to stay silent. Remember that. You do not owe emotional reactions to everyone. Not every insult deserves response. Not every criticism deserves explanation. Not every misunderstanding deserves emotional energy. Some things deserve silence. That silence protects your nervous system. Protects your focus. Protects your emotional balance. And emotional balance creates mental clarity. Most people underestimate how much energy unnecessary talking wastes. Defending yourself constantly. Explaining yourself constantly. Arguing constantly. Exhausting. Especially because emotionally reactive conversations rarely solve anything. They only intensify emotional chaos. But silence creates control. Calmness. Perspective. That is why emotionally disciplined people often speak slowly and intentionally. Their words carry weight because they are not constantly reacting emotionally. Stillness creates power. That's the key. Think about truly confident people. They rarely need to dominate conversations emotionally. They do not rush to prove themselves. They remain composed, grounded, present. Because confidence does not need constant expression. Insecurity does. That is why emotionally reactive people often speak from fear without realizing it. Fear of rejection. Fear of misunderstanding. Fear of being ignored. But emotionally disciplined people are comfortable with silence. comfortable with observation, comfortable with emotional control. That comfort creates stability, and stability creates influence. You have a choice. You can continue giving away emotional access through impulsive reactions and unnecessary words. Or you can learn the discipline of silence. One path creates emotional vulnerability. The other creates emotional strength. Remember the lesson. Emotion talks too much. Silence increases perception. And unreadable people are difficult to manipulate. The less people know about your emotions, the less power they have over you. Master that principle, and your presence changes completely. You become calmer, more aware, more disciplined. And once emotional discipline becomes identity, something powerful happens. You stop reacting like everyone else. You become emotionally unbreakable. That is exactly where this journey leads next. Everything changes when you control your emotions. Everything. Your relationships improve. Your decisions improve. Your confidence improves. Your focus improves. Your future improves. Because emotional mastery affects every area of life. That's the truth. Most people think success is only about intelligence. Wrong. Many intelligent people destroy their lives emotionally. Through anger, impulsiveness, fear, addiction, emotional instability. Because knowledge without emotional control becomes dangerous. That's why emotional mastery matters. It protects everything you build. A person with emotional discipline handles relationships differently. They communicate calmly, set boundaries clearly, remain stable during conflict. They do not collapse emotionally every time life becomes difficult. That stability creates trust. And trust creates strong relationships. Emotionally reactive people create chaos around them constantly. One emotional explosion damages connection. One impulsive decision damages loyalty. One moment of insecurity damages respect. But emotionally disciplined people create peace instead. Because calmness changes environments. That's the key. The calmest person in the room often becomes the strongest presence in the room. Not because they dominate emotionally. Because they remain grounded while others lose control. Remember this phrase. When everyone loses control, you remain steady. That is emotional power. And emotional power creates leadership naturally. Think about great leaders. During crisis, panic spreads quickly. People look for stability, clarity, direction. Emotionally weak leaders create fear during chaos. Emotionally disciplined leaders create calmness during chaos. That calmness becomes influence. Because people trust emotional stability. Always. The same applies financially. Emotional people make emotional financial decisions. Impulse spending. Fear-based decisions. Short-term thinking. Why? Because emotion clouds judgment. But disciplined people remain rational under pressure. They think long-term. Stay patient. Control impulses. And over time, emotional control creates better outcomes. That's why emotional mastery affects success deeply. Success is not only about talent. It is about consistency. And consistency requires emotional stability. A person who quits every time emotions become difficult never reaches mastery. A person controlled by mood never reaches discipline. But emotionally strong people continue regardless of temporary feelings. That is what separates average people from exceptional people. Not motivation. Discipline. It's not about emotion. It's about discipline. Remember that. Most people wait to feel ready before acting. Emotionally disciplined people act despite feelings. That habit changes everything. Because emotions change constantly. Some days you feel confident. Some days you feel tired. Some days you feel uncertain. But discipline continues anyway. That consistency builds identity. And identity shapes destiny. That's the key. Discipline must become identity. Not temporary motivation. Not occasional effort. Identity. You are not trying to practice emotional control sometimes. You are becoming someone who lives with emotional control consistently. That difference matters. Temporary discipline creates temporary results. Identity-based discipline creates permanent transformation. Emotionally unbreakable people do not rely on emotional motivation daily. They rely on standards. Standards for behavior. Standards for reactions. Standards for self-control. Even under pressure. Especially under pressure. Because pressure reveals emotional conditioning immediately. And emotionally disciplined people prepare for pressure before it arrives. They train calmness daily. Train awareness daily. Train restraint daily. Small habits become powerful identities over time. That is how emotional mastery is built. Quietly. Consistently. Most people want emotional strength without emotional training. Impossible. You cannot build emotional resilience while constantly avoiding discomfort. Growth requires challenge. Every difficult moment becomes an opportunity to strengthen emotional control. Arguments. Criticism. Failure. Stress. These moments are emotional training grounds. Weak people become reactive during pressure. Strong people become more disciplined during pressure. That is the difference. When everyone loses control, you remain steady. Never forget that. That mindset changes health too. Emotional chaos damages the body constantly. Stress. Anxiety. Overthinking. Anger. The nervous system pays a price for emotional instability. But calmness protects energy. Protects sleep. Protects focus. Protects health. That is why peace is valuable. Not just emotionally. Physically. Emotionally disciplined people understand this deeply. They protect their mental state intentionally. Because they know emotional exhaustion destroys quality of life slowly. That is why emotional mastery is not luxury. It is survival. Especially in a world designed to overstimulate you constantly. News. Social media. Drama. Comparison. Pressure. Every day the world competes for your emotional attention. And emotionally weak people surrender immediately. But emotionally strong people remain centered, grounded, aware. That awareness protects them. You have a choice. You can spend your life reacting emotionally to everything around you. Or you can become emotionally unbreakable. One path creates chaos. The other creates freedom. Emotionally unbreakable does not mean emotionless. Important distinction. You still feel emotions. You still experience pain, stress, fear, disappointment. But emotions no longer control your identity or behavior completely. That is mastery. You feel emotions without becoming consumed by them. You observe emotions without obeying them automatically. You remain calm enough to think clearly under pressure. That calmness becomes your advantage. Most people collapse emotionally when life becomes difficult. You remain steady. Most people panic during uncertainty. You remain focused. Most people react impulsively during conflict. You remain disciplined. That difference changes your future entirely. Because emotionally stable people make better decisions consistently. And better decisions create better lives. Simple. Not easy. But simple. Discipline must become identity. That is the final lesson. You are not building emotional control temporarily. You are building a new standard for your life. A new way of thinking. Responding. Living. One where emotions no longer dominate your behavior automatically. One where peace becomes internal instead of dependent on external circumstances. One where discipline becomes stronger than impulse. That is emotional freedom. And emotional freedom is one of the greatest forms of power a human being can develop. Remember the lessons from this journey. If they can trigger you, they can control you. Your attention is your life force. Fear speaks loudly when purpose is weak. Protect your mind like your life depends on it, because it does. The less people know about your emotions, the less power they have over you. And finally, when everyone loses control, you remain steady. That is emotional mastery. That is emotional discipline. That is how you become emotionally unbreakable. And once you reach that level, the world no longer controls your inner state. You do. Your emotions are either your greatest strength or your greatest weakness. Every reaction shapes your future. Every impulse builds or destroys your character. Every moment of emotional weakness gives away power. But now you know the truth. You do not have to react to everything. You do not have to explain yourself to everyone. You do not have to let anger, fear, rejection, pressure, or pain control your decisions. You can become calm. You can become disciplined. You can become emotionally unbreakable. Because real power is not loud. Real power is controlled, measured, focused, silent. The world is filled with emotional people destroying their lives one reaction at a time. Do not become one of them. Train your mind. Protect your peace. Control your emotions before they control you. And starting today, when life tests you, When people provoke you. When pressure hits you. Do the one thing weak people cannot do. Stay calm.